Welcome to Dunwise Perspectives, a podcast about stories of resilience and shifting mindsets. I'm your host, Doris Dunn. My guests are leaders, entrepreneurs, and everyday people who've navigated change, faced uncertainty, and discovered new ways of thinking when life didn't go according to plan. If you're navigating a season of change, feeling stuck, or simply curious about how small mindset shifts can lead to meaningful progress, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hey, Jason, how are you today?
I'm good, Doris. Thanks for asking. How are you?
I am doing very well. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. I know you and I met at a networking event probably 2 years ago, something like that. And I know we've had the chance to get to know each other. We've had coffee a few times. We've talked about our businesses. But I think our best conversation was the one that we had a couple of weeks ago, where we started diving a little deeper into our histories and where we came from. And I learned some things about you that I did not know, and immediately thought, you need to be a guest on my podcast. Your story is amazing. You have overcome some incredible obstacles. And I just want our listeners to hear a little bit more of your story. But let's just start at the higher level and share a little bit about who you are, what you do, and then we'll go on from there.
Sounds great. Thank you. And thanks for having me on. I was born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana, and been in Nashville since 1996. Came here to study at Vanderbilt. I got my master's degree there, my MBA there, and I've been in business development /sales/sales consulting for the better part of 30 years.
Yeah, and I think that I knew about you because I think that's part of your elevator pitch. And so I knew some of those
Right.
things about you from
Right.
the early days of the networking events that we've been to.
Mhm.
But as I said, I learned some new things about you. I knew about your heart, but
Right.
that goes so far back. Can you share a little bit about when you were born, what was discovered? What was wrong with your heart? What did the doctors learn? And how old were you when the doctors discovered what was wrong with your heart?
When I was 4 months old, the doctors discovered that I had a VSD, ventricular septal defect, and a coarctation or a narrowing of the aorta, both of which were serious and which were impeding blood flow to the rest of the body the way that it should be flowing. So they corrected that, but they put a note in the file that I didn't see until much later that said that at some point further complications were going to arise. So went through childhood, went through teenage years, started college, everything was fine. And then wound up getting a bacterial infection when I was 20 and had to have open heart surgery to replace my aortic valve
Wow.
and half of my aorta. Yeah. So that lasted, that there was a gap of about 18 years there. And when I was 38, I had to have my mitral valve replaced because it had worn out its welcome. 4 years later, I had to have a pacemaker put in. And then 2 years later, I had to have a defibrillator put in as well. So I believe that's 5 heart surgeries,
Mm-hmm.
right up to the age of 40 thereabouts, 40 or mid 40s. So that is the heart history up until December of 22, which is what you and I really started to talk about, which
Yeah.
is where I started to get very sick in 2021, unable to go upstairs, conquer a small hill, perform basic functions. And so I had a kidneys gave out too, heart and kidney transplant at the end of December of 2022, which they told me when I was 20, I'd probably have to have one sooner or later, but we just didn't know when.
Yeah.
And it's not something you just pencil into your calendar. I mean, it's obviously a very serious
Usually
endeavor.
comes exactly at the most inopportune moment in our lives, likely. How
It does. It does. I was only on the list for 6 weeks, the waiting list. I was very fortunate.
Wow. How common is it that the heart and the kidneys both fail at the same time?
Well, my understanding is that there are roughly 3,000 heart transplants in the United States per year, and 10% of those are dual transplants, whether that's heart kidney, heart lung, whatever form those take. So the answer to your question is rare,
Yeah.
very rare. Yeah,
But you're doing really, really well right now. I know you shared before we hit record that you're headed to the gym as soon as we're done here. So it was a very successful surgery. And health wise, you're doing extremely well today.
I am. I will say that another part of what we talked about was after the transplants went off without a hitch. During recovery in the hospital, I wound up contracting pancreatitis, acute pancreatitis. And for those that are not familiar with it, pancreatitis is the medical equivalent of your body staging a major rebellion. It is when the enzymes that digest your food start digesting your pancreas instead. So for 6 months, the pain was constant. It was excruciating. I developed sepsis, brain swelling, had a tracheotomy, lost 50 pounds, had a feeding tube. They didn't think I was going to make it, but miraculously I did, and was released from the hospital about 7 months later. So almost 9 months in the hospital continuously there for a bit.
That is such a crazy story. And that is only the tip of the iceberg of your story because I want to go all the way back to your childhood and
Okay.
talk about the bullying that you suffered. I mean, I'm
Sure.
sure that was related possibly to your health, the health challenges that you had. But tell me about the bullying that you went through and how long did that last and how serious was it?
I went to a very small private school in New Orleans and was with the same children for all 13 years, K through 12. The bullying really started in middle school on the school bus that I rode. There were three siblings, a sister and two brothers, and the brothers were the middle and the youngest children, and they were the ones that really began tormenting me hardcore. One of them knew self defense and would use it against me. I was smaller, partially due to the heart situation. It did stunt my growth some. And I have never been a mean person. I've never really been a fighter. And my mother always said she wishes that I had a little more of that in me. I used to come home bruised, battered, in tears from rides on the school bus. And then it continued in school as well. So it was not a good period. That sixth through eighth grade, the sixth through eighth grade years.
Did the teachers or your parents or their parents, did anyone do anything about it? How did you survive that?
So my parents did wind up speaking to the brother's parents, and it did subside for a while. But then towards the end of my eighth grade year, it picked up again. So how did I survive it? I just told myself that it wasn't going to last forever. And a couple of times I fought back and they left me alone. And other times I fought back and they didn't leave me alone. The worst memory that I have is my father actually got on the bus one day to scare them into not bullying me anymore. And they didn't the rest of that year, a good 6 or 8 months. They didn't do that. But then the last day of school, one of the brothers and about 10 other people on the bus got on top of me and crushed me into the seat where I was sitting. And the bus driver could have stopped the bus. He could have told them to stop. None of that happened. I don't think that would happen in this world. Today, bullying is so guarded against in this environment today, in this generation. But back then, it just wasn't the same. So
Yeah.
it ended when they got off the bus.
So sorry. If you could talk to your younger self or even your younger selves, parents or teachers, but primarily yourself, what would you tell yourself? So I'm sure we have listeners whose children are being bullied, or maybe they were bullied themselves. What would you tell them to overcome that or to help themselves?
Well, what I would have done and should have done, and what I would tell children that are being bullied to do, is to communicate the seriousness of the bullying to your parents and to the people at school that you respect in your life and you know that care about you, and don't give up. If they don't listen the first time, keep saying it and keep being loud about it. And for the parents, I would say if your child is in an unsafe environment where he or she is subject to bullying at a serious level, especially with social media and everything else going on these days, remove them from that environment. If that means driving them to school instead of being on the bus, if that
Mhm.
means escorting them into school, whatever you need to do to protect your child, listen,
Yeah. Do
listen.
do you feel like that you had all the support from your parents that you needed?
I do not. I feel like my father, as loving as a person as he was at work all the time, day and night, was not as involved with my day to day as my mother was. And I do remember asking to be taken off the bus. I do remember asking to transfer schools, but none of that happened. And I think she wishes now that she had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ugh, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I can't imagine. I can't even imagine, but I know that your challenges didn't stop in 8th grade, as you
Right.
shared with me. Tell me about your father and how later in life his challenges kind of impacted you, and what did you do in your 20s that I know you regret today? You shared that with me over coffee a few weeks ago.
Mhm.
Share that story. And I think you were in college at the time and some important things happened later in your 20s.
Yes. So to walk it back a little bit, my father was my touchstone. He was my idol from a very young age. But as I got older, I started to notice that he drank quite a bit, but he was a very functional drinker. And he gave me my first sip of alcohol when I was 11. And so light went off and I realized that I liked it. And growing up in New Orleans, you get your driver's license at 15, you get your fake ID 2 weeks later, and you start drinking in high school. And that was the social scene. And I believe it still is. And he started to drink heavier. I started to drink heavier when I was in high school, and we used to commiserate and talk about that. And eventually we wound up drinking together when I was in my early 20s. So unfortunately, we became more friends and we became father and son. But I think the culminating event was that my father got really, really sick in the summer of 97.
Mhm.
And I got a call from my mother and said he was in the hospital, but she didn't say much else. So I got home and he was in an alcoholic coma in the hospital. And he had cirrhosis and liver cancer at that point. And he hadn't really told anybody that that was developing. My parents were divorced. It was an ugly divorce. He didn't communicate with anybody, etc. And anyway, it was a Friday when I got home, and he didn't look great, but I thought he might make it. So I went home that night at my grandmother's house, slept, went back the next day. The next day, he looked a lot worse. He was yellow and distended and thin and hardly breathing. And I decided that I was going to spend the night with him in the hospital room. So I fell asleep at about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I woke up at about 5 minutes to 6 on Sunday morning. And I walked over to the side of his bed, and I put my hand on his hand. And about 10 seconds later, he took his last breath. So to this day, I am eternally grateful that I was there at the exact moment
Yeah.
that he passed. And that moment for me was an awakening. And 2 months later, I came back to Nashville, and then 2 months later, I got sober. And I've been in recovery for close to 30 years now.
It is amazing. I'm always so incredibly amazed by the stories of those that have gone through that and that are so faithful to their sobriety and Those stories are amazing. And I've heard other stories where it's, and we've talked about this, the bottom of the barrel. That I've talked to other alcoholics that they have to go to that bottom of the barrel a number of times, that they haven't hit, or not the bottom of the barrel, I'm sorry, the rock bottom. And they have to hit rock bottom. And when they think they hit rock bottom, they go into recovery, but it wasn't the actual rock bottom for them. And I know everyone's rock bottom is different. And can you share about tell us a little bit more. So, someone that doesn't know what rock bottom is, or has never heard that term, what does that mean, and how did it impact you? And I know some of that had to do with your father, but what inside of your own mind, your own body, what made you realize this is not the life for me? I've got to stop. And I know you were doing more than alcohol too, and you shared an incredible story. I think that you were in your apartment, and share that, if you don't mind, share that story.
The rock bottom for me, for a lot of the alcoholics that I've been friends with for a long time, excuse me, from a mental perspective, you hate yourself. You hate yourself. You don't think you're worthy of anything good, of anybody good. And that is the disease. That is the disease that tries to kill you. It's a mind powered disease. Bottom for me, and I think this is what you're referring to, is I was living in an apartment in the fall of 1997 under a house with these cinder block walls with spaces in between them with the cold air rushing in. I had a marijuana bong in my right hand and a $3 bottle of red wine in my left hand, and a plate with a straw and a razor blade underneath my couch for when I could find some cocaine. And that's where I was living the day I got sober.
I know you shared that story with me a few weeks ago, and I don't think I'll stop getting chills when I hear that story. I can't put myself there, but if you could put our listeners there, what was happening in your mind? What made you feel like you needed these three things in front of you, and then suddenly, almost instantaneously, realizing I've got to stop all of this instantly at once, and you did. And then who helped you with that?
Sure. So I think for me, just going back to the feeling of being unworthy, low self esteem, no self esteem related to the bullying, related to not having a lot of friends throughout middle school and high school, not being one of the popular kids, did theater, did band, did gymnastics, didn't play football, baseball, basketball. A lot of feelings associated with doing the wrong things, the unpopular things while I was growing up. Strained relationships within my family, especially with my mother. In my head, sitting there in that apartment, the main thought that a lot of addicts and alcoholics have is nobody would understand. If I said what I'm thinking out loud, people would think I was insane. Who helped me? First meeting I ever went to, I didn't talk. I just listened because I had nothing to offer. I heard words like serenity and peace and character and self-esteem and friendship. But then there were some stories that were worse than mine.
Mm.
And I thought, finally, I realized that I wasn't alone, that there were people who understood where I was coming from and that there was a solution to the problem.
Yeah. And I know you faithfully go to these meetings every week. Why is it
Mhm.
so important? Why can't you go to a meeting, get better, and then you're good for the rest of your life? I know it doesn't work that way, but why do you need that
Right.
constant support even 30 years later? Why is that so important?
One of the big sort of sayings in AA is that we don't have a drinking disease, we have a forgetting disease. And the ego and self centeredness of the alcoholic, by their very nature, a lot of people that relapse, they get sober and they're sober a long time, and then they stop the spiritual aspect of their program. They stop prayer, they stop talking to other people, they stop going to meetings and they relapse
Mm.
because they lose that connection, that human connection and that spiritual connection. And for me, meetings are the meetings and sponsorship. But meetings, I go to a meeting every Saturday where there are 50 men in a room and there are hundreds of years of sobriety. And if you go in having a bad day, it's a reminder that, this stuff works.
Yeah.
The other side of it is it's not just about you, it's about helping other people.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was somebody in that room last week that was 3 days sober. They need to hear from me
Yeah.
and others that it works.
How do you handle a room full of alcohol? I know that all these networking events that you and I go together, they're quite often in bars, they're in areas that have alcohol, and the guy next to you's got a gin and tonic, the lady across the hall's got a glass of wine. How do you manage being around that?
So in the literature of AA, the book, there's part of the book that says that if we're spiritually fit, we can go anywhere and do anything. So I pray every day. I talk to my sponsor every week. I go to meetings every week. That's how I maintain my spiritual condition, my spiritual health. And the other thing I would say is that when I went to that first meeting, people talk about this, but people don't believe it. The desire to use was removed from me. I mean, that is part
Really?
of the miracle of the program. Yes. Yes. My wife has a Jack and Coke every night. Like you said, we go everywhere, people drink. I don't need it. I don't want it. And the other thing is a healthy fear in the back of my head, if I do, I'll be dancing in the middle of the room naked with a lampshade on my head. I mean, it's, something like that's going to happen. And, it won't just be alcohol either, right? I'll regress
Mhm.
back into other substances that I use as well.
Yeah.
And with my health the way it is, it'll kill me.
Yeah. I know people that are recovering smokers. They gave up smoking, and every time they smell a cigarette, they want a cigarette again. And it's an addiction. But how would you say that mentally you were able to say, I don't need it anymore? I feel like there's a difference between forcing yourself not to do it because you know it's unhealthy versus truly not having the desire anymore. Talk about that difference and how you were able to get to the place where you no longer desire it. And are all alcoholics like that? Or do some of them desire it and have to force themselves not to do it?
Well, it's interesting. When I first got sober, my sponsor asked me to look up the definition of the word sober. And sober doesn't mean not drinking. Sober actually means being free from fantasy.
Free
So
from fantasy. Sober is free
free from
from
fantasy.
fantasy.
That's right. That's what it says in the dictionary I looked up the word
Mm-hmm.
in. And I'm not a religious person. I am a spiritual person. And I continue to pray for the desire to drink to be removed from me. And it's a kind of vigilance and a kind of surrender that I used to be a smoker too, and 3 packs a day in college. And I got married for the first time. That's what helped me stop smoking. But don't have the desire to do it now. And it really was the same way. I kept asking my higher power, which I call God, to remove the desire to smoke, drink, do drugs from me. And that's the difference. I think that smokers, anybody can white knuckle it,
Yeah.
but if you don't turn it over, for me, it would have never taken.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and
Yeah.
maybe that's where the relapse can come from too, is where it's you're white knuckling it, and the white knuckling can only go so far. And when you truly surrender, you use that word a few times. When you truly surrender and understand the true meaning of the word sober, that you're able to give it up and move in a new direction, and then get those coins. I think you get coins when
You do.
every year. Is that right?
You do. Well, you get them for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and 6 months. And then you start getting them for years. And, if it's all about the medallions, it's really not the right
No,
approach.
no.
The medallions are, I call them sobriety checkpoints, right?
Hmm.
They're markers in the way of along the path. But it does feel good to get them because you know that hopefully you've helped some other people along the way and you have not been a burden or a menace to anybody in your life.
Yeah. So talk about your life today. I know you're happily married, you're doing really well, you're working out,
Mhm.
career-wise you're doing really well. Share about your life today and what you learned from all of the challenges that you faced that helped you have a successful life.
Well, I think the first thing that I would say to that is that in spite of all of the camaraderie in Alcoholics Anonymous, in spite of your marriage, in spite of your friends, I mean, there has to be an inner belief you have to take full responsibility for your life. It- It's much harder than people think. I think a lot of people would be afraid to admit that, but for me, I didn't start taking responsibility for myself until I was 27, 28 years old, once I got rid of all the drugs and alcohol. I think for me, part of my disease, part of my issue growing up was that I used to see myself as I saw me in my head. And my brain, my filter, my self perception was broken. So I needed to tell myself to see myself as my higher power saw me and maybe as people who respected me, how those people see me.
I love that.
And
How
yeah, yeah.
help our listeners do that? What would you say, what advice could you give to our listeners to try to flip that switch from seeing yourself, like you said, as you see through your own eyes versus seeing yourself through others' eyes and God's eyes and your mentors, the people that respect you? How do you move from that one vision to the other vision?
Well, for me, the path to that was humility because I think I mentioned before the biggest trait of any alcoholic addict is self-centeredness and ego. But the irony is that we don't have an ego because we don't like ourselves, right? And if we don't like ourselves, we don't know what's good for us. But the people that respect us and that love us, a lot of times they do know what's good for us. So I would say self-reliance can be a dangerous strategy.
Mm.
And sometimes you have to let down your guard and rely on other people to lift you up.
You've got to be vulnerable. That's one of my favorite words is being vulnerable. And I know Brene Brown talks about it all the time that how important vulnerability is and that you can grow from a place of vulnerability. And I mean, even in this podcast, that's what this is all about is allowing people to be vulnerable and allowing the stories to help other people realize that they can see themselves in these stories and that they're not alone. And I think there's a big part of this podcast is what you talk about at the AA meetings is that we're not alone. No one needs to suffer by themselves. No one needs to view themselves the way they view themselves. We are a giant community called human beings, and we need to be better about helping each other and being a part of whatever community. Obviously, we can't be the billions of humans, but being part of the various communities, whether it's AA, whether it's a networking group that we go to, and we really bond with people at some of these networking events that we go to, or our church, our families, our neighborhoods. It's so important that we are able to rely on each other. And I think, yeah, vulnerability, humility, those are two really important words.
I agree. I agree. I think the most important thing in this world is to know that you are not alone in your life or in your thoughts.
Yes, absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
Jason, do you have any parting words for me or for our listeners that you want to share, or maybe questions I didn't ask that you really wanted to answer?
I don't think so. I think the main thing that I would like to say is fear is a corrosive force, and you do not have to be afraid by yourself. People looking from the outside in are always able to help you. And like you just said, you have to be willing to be vulnerable. That is how you flip that switch,
Hmm.
as you mentioned before. And you know, men in this country, to this day, in spite of all the metrosexual, things that are out and about these days. A lot of men, a lot of American men just don't like being vulnerable like that. And it's their downfall a lot of times. And if people would soften up a little bit and be a little more empathetic and
Mm.
self-empathetic, I think we'd be happier.
Yes, I agree. I was just listening to a story that things apparently changed with the male-female connection back in the 1800s, and that men were a lot closer, and I don't remember, it was Freud. There was someone that tried to put a name on it, and basically men moved from a place of vulnerability to being these stoic figures that could never cry, could never feel anything. And in over 100 years, we've never been able to turn that around. I think it's starting to. I'm starting to see more vulnerability in men than I used to, which is really refreshing. And I hope that we continue down that path and maybe get rid of these labels that Freud or whoever it was put on men, and that we are able to share more and be more human the way that you were meant to be.
Yes, I think Freud and Nietzsche and Machiavelli and all those guys, very antiquated ways of thinking and confining as well.
Agreed, agreed. Well,
Yeah.
Jason, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. Thank you for being so open and sharing your story. And I am sure that a lot of our listeners will get a lot out of this story and they will see themselves in this story. And again, thank you.
For having me. It's been a great time, and I'm honored that you would have me on.
Oh, it's my honor. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening or watching this episode. If something from today's conversation resonated with you, I'd love for you to share this episode with someone who might need it, or take a moment to reflect on what stood out for you. You can find show notes wherever you get your podcasts. And if you enjoy the podcast, subscribing or leaving a review helps more people find these conversations. Until next time, keep learning, stay curious, and remember, sometimes a small shift in perspective can change everything.